There's been a fair amount of discussion in recent weeks within the Flesh and Blood world around depressed pricing on sealed boxes, cheating minimum advertised price, and all that jazz. And while much of that conversation has presented as frustration and discourse, as with anything, there are often two sides to every outrage. The reality is that the how we got here and the why we got here, both regarding LSS's partnerships with third parties, are more nuanced and complex than is often given credit. So in a series of videos, we're diving into the situation as we know it and evaluating both sides of the argument to try and make sense of it all. Because I'm by no means an expert on the subjects or have all the info, I'm bringing in help. Today, I'm joined by Kayo of FabDB fame to talk about these partnerships and both the benefits and the fallouts they've provided. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, Flesh and Blood folks, and welcome back to Dice Commando and Go Again. Many of you guys know that we here are often sponsored by FabDB, but today I'm actually joined by FabDB. The CEO, COO, CFO, and probably less than minimum wage worker all in one, the creator of FabDB, the man known to the community as Kayo. How's it going, my friend?
Very well, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. Really good to chat to you. I've been wanting to talk to you, I think, for a pretty long time. And this seems like a really interesting discussion to kind of pick your brain as well, which I'm kind of keen to do. So keen to get moving on what I'd say is a bit of a controversial topic at the moment.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So what is the, like you say, controversial topic at the moment? What is the, what's the problem statement?
At the moment, it seems like there's a lot of outrage around CFB, which seems to be largely spoiled, I guess, by Rudy from Alpha Investments. And I would say there's a lot of discussion there, which you mentioned in the intro, that there, and from my view, I guess at least, seems to be a little bit one-sided and very negative. And although there are certainly some sort of questionable elements around that, I personally feel some of the, I guess, shit flinging at LSS is a little bit unnecessary at the very least, and potentially even nefarious, sort of worst case scenarios. So, yeah, so I'm hoping we can kind of address some of those points. And, you know, admittedly, I'm a little bit biased and probably a little bit defensive of LSS, but having worked with them for quite some time and knowing James White personally, you know, throughout that period, I think I have a little bit to say on it, you know, back them in their corner. So,
sure. So, for the purpose of having a discussion, I will often, or in several points here, I may play devil's advocate, right, to try and play the community side, right, as we should in a discussion. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's my point of view on the topic, but I want to make sure that we're addressing both sides equally as we go, right? So the outrage as it is right now is basically, much of it comes around the depressed pricing of sealed boxes. That's kind of the overall problem statement, I think, that's driving a lot of that, whether it be from the collector side, whether it be from players who are worried about their LGSs dropping the game, right? We had someone on my Discord, someone who's basically very involved in the channel. I trust him. He said that his LGS is dropping the game. They actually put a bunch of sales online this week where they were breaking MAP, and for an LGS to knowingly break MAP, they're basically saying, we're done because we don't care if we get scolded, right? So, you know, that's just a one-off example, but we have been hearing about stuff like that, and that's the concern from the player base. That said, I think what you and I've talked about offline in many cases is, I don't know that we would be here today if those agreements hadn't been made, right? So just because they exist today as they exist doesn't mean that they are bad in all senses. So I know you had some topics and stuff you wanted to drive us through, but is that pretty much summing up your overall take as well? Is, you know, it's not all bad, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sort of keyboard warriors out there that I think claim to know exactly what's sort of going on behind the scenes, and you know, I don't think you or I really know either. I think I have a sort of a good general sense in regards to how these things function and work. But obviously, I don't have the details in regards to contractual agreements, obligations on both sides of the agreement, and so the best we can do is really try and speculate with, I would say, an educated guess in regards to the challenges presented to LSS specifically. With sort of COVID going on, trying to start a new TCG in a market that is just saturated with TCGs, and sort of what that means to them and what it can mean for CFB as well, right? If those agreements work. So I think there is a lot of nuance there that not everybody is missing. You see some really kind of good, I would say, guesses from the community in regards to what's going on, which I would largely agree with. But unfortunately, there's quite a bit of negativity as well in regards to LSS only doing it for greed, or CFB doing certain bad things, which I think at least on the CFB side, I would probably agree with most of the claims, but the claims that have really no knowledge in regards to what's going on the side of the LSS, I think are at the very least misplaced. So we can kind of get to those in time, but to me, I sort of saw your comment with Louis and sort of having a discussion there, and I thought I'd put my hand up as well to make that similar sort of offer. So it would be good actually. I look forward to that video with you and Louis as well, kind of see what comes out of that. But I certainly have my opinions and views, being someone who's very community focused, and I think the agreement between CFB and LSS is a sort of necessary evil, and that's not to say it's sort of evil by its nature, but it's sort of panned out in a way that not everybody sort of agrees with, which sort of paints unfortunately a bad light on LSS as well.
Yeah, I think that the necessary evil thing is a dangerous statement, but I think we all understand what you're saying, right? And I mean, yeah. So let me basically ask you this, right? Why partnerships at all, right? Why would LSS ever enter a partnership with a company such as that? We know they did it with Rudy. We know they did it with Team Covenant. We know they did it with LSS. To whatever extent, we're not saying we know what the contracts were, but we know that those handshake agreements that were probably more than handshakes are there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is that during the early days of Flesh and Blood, LSS tried really, really, really hard to effectively avoid distributors completely, going directly to stores, trying to drive up business that way. And the reason for that is because it allows them to circumvent the middleman, which effectively makes the product cheaper in the long run. So if you're able to target LGSs directly, have them sign on board, and then give them product effectively at a discount to other TCGs, it gives them a competitive place within the market, just purely from a sort of fiscal perspective, right? They can sell their boxes a little bit cheaper. They're not actually losing money on it. And it's all the merrier. And that worked really well in New Zealand, to my knowledge. But in Australia, even a smaller country as ours with only 26 million people, they really struggled to kind of get stores on board. And the reason for that was because most stores, particularly sort of big gaming stores and chains like Good Games, really only wanted to deal through their distributor. And in Australia, I think we have two, but one of them is responsible for most games that come into the market, board games, miniature games, and trading card games. And so what was really interesting, and this is something James White told me directly when I saw him at the calling in early 2020, was that the stats for the game for LGSs that bought it up were doing exceptionally well. So they use sort of stat modeling to kind of make a educated guess in regards to how many stores would take up the product, and then how much product those stores would actually sell. And they found what was really interesting was like that their modeling was off considerably in the sense that they found fewer stores were taking up the game, but the stores that actually did take up the game were doing way better than they expected. And I can attest to this personally in the stores that I know that picked it up. In particular, one called RC Crew Games, which I would say is one of the leading stores in Australia for supporting Flesh and Blood. I know almost completely that Flesh and Blood basically helped them survive through COVID. And if it wasn't Flesh and Blood, it actually would have died, which is really interesting considering that Flesh and Blood, during particularly the early days of the lockdowns, effectively had to move to sort of an online support channel through TTS and other features and that sort of thing. And they still somehow survived. So this is really a long way of me saying that they really tried to go directly to LGSs, but ended up unfortunately at distributors' doors, knocking on their doors and selling it that way. And so how does this sort of relate to CFB? Come back to a question regarding partnerships and agreements. They're really necessary, actually. I think they've sort of proven that it's actually necessary for TCG to get off the ground to have some sort of agreement or partnership, at the very least with its distributors. And with the amount of product that CFB was willing to buy, they effectively became a distributor for the game in the American market. And we can look at some stats in regards to that later, in regards to the impact on the game directly from FabDB, which I think is really interesting and pushes that case forward. So, I think it was something that LSS didn't really want to do, but found that they had to do it just to get the game to a point where it was actually successful, so to get mass market appeal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and again, we're not claiming here that we know any of the contract details or anything like that, to be very clear. But it's not it's pretty obvious that in many cases they could potentially have used pre-order or down payments or something from those particular deals to help foot the bill as a new company to get stuff printed, right? Yeah. So, or at least to be able to go in and say, well, yeah, can we borrow this much money because we've got these many orders on place or whatever, right? So having those contracts in place for a new company, right? Something that Wizards and all these other companies don't necessarily have to deal with, but for a new company to come in and say, look, we have lines of capital out there, that's an important thing. And it makes sense to me that they would have reached out to some sort of initial investor, however that formed up, right?
Yeah, I mean they definitely do have investors. I don't know the specifics around that, but I know one particular individual that's involved in the company has sort of organized those financial channels for them. I think it was a good friend of James White, and so the game could have very well sort of grown at a snail's pace from New Zealand to Australia, sort of as they just kind of stayed focused on stores. But the fact is that the investors aren't going to wait around for 15, 20 years to get any sort of return on their investment, right? And so, TCGs cost a lot of money to develop. The game was in development for 7 years, and all that artwork, all that rule development, all that test takes millions and millions of dollars, which not everybody sort of has in their back pocket to just, throw at a game. So, investors need to come on board. The difference, I think, between sort of LSS and many other sort of games is that the investors are largely hands-off in regards to the direction they take the business. That doesn't mean that they have complete leeway to just grow the business at their own pace. They do need to sort of hit certain targets and that sort of thing. So that's very interesting. And so I think sort of getting partnerships with Rudy and CFB and others, for example, in the EU, is really important for the game to grow at a healthy pace, because you sort of need to reach a sort of certain terminal velocity in regards to the game's growth in order to actually support the game financially and just from a community perspective. It's all very well and good for the game to just sort of live within New Zealand and do well there, but I don't think that's going to be enough to effectively make a return on investment for investors and that sort of thing. And also, James White spent 7, or we're going on now sort of 10 years actually. He's been working on this game, and so he doesn't want to have this amount to nothing. He wants to see some success there as well. Just as an individual. So, and by the way, I'm not saying James has said this. I'm just feeling. I mean, that's what I would want. I would want to see some success. And so, there is this, I think, sort of push to see some return there. To just from an individual perspective, to validate the hard work that you're doing. And so, these partnerships, sort of exist for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. So, but yeah, so now, okay, so they needed it to get it started. They're established now. Let's dump them like they're causing problems. LGSs are closing, and all my stuff's cheap. I'm an investor, and I've lost $1,000 on Monarch First Edition. Drop those suckers, right?
Myself.
Drop those suckers, right? So what's your thoughts there?
Look, I think LSS is caught between sort of a rock and a hard place. I mean, we can get to some of the points I've raised. I think that might be relevant at this point. But CFB, I would say, has definitely done some dodgy things that I personally don't appreciate. And from fairly early on, I think it was actually Monarch, but it might have been earlier, whereby they clearly had a lot of stock. They would put boxes up on the website. Those boxes would sell out, and then the same day, more boxes would be available at a higher price. They're not getting stock refills, every day, and then selling out every day. It's just not happening. So, they were very clearly sort of gating the pricing on the boxes at certain intervals, purely just to make more money. Like there was no other reason behind that. And I don't as pragmatic as I try and be in regards to a lot of these topics and discussions, I just can't see a pragmatic reason as to why they would do that outside of raising funds. Now, also, I will say though, in their defense, is that they took a huge bet on Flesh and Blood. You know, when they sort of bought in at WTR Alpha Edition as well, they gave a lot of cash to LSS to buy up all those boxes. So they certainly took a risk in regards to that, which obviously paid off. But by the time that Monarch rolls around, you know, it's no longer risk. They can see things are doing well. Mm-hmm. There was just no need for them to do that. And so I think they're sort of burning the candle at both ends, in the sense that on the one hand, Monarch, they charged an exorbitant amount of money for because the market was willing to pay it. And now on the other side, they're now sort of bundling up boxes together to sort of get around a minimum advertised pricing to sell at a cheaper rate. And that is actually what's going to be hurting LGS. Right. So you know, we can whine and complain, as I did, about the sort of Monarch box pricing that they were doing. But in reality, I don't really think that hurts the game too much, particularly when sort of Unlimited is around. But when they're selling boxes at a much cheaper price, that actually affects LGSs and their ability to sort of sell stock, because you know, the community is sort of moving to CFB to buy boxes there. Then we start to have a real problem on our hands. And I think I'm fairly certain LSS will be having discussions with them, but the reality of the situation is they can't really do anything. And without knowing the specifics of the agreement they have with CFB, they may be tied to a contract that they can't get out of. You know, they may be sort of lodged for 4 to 5 years or something, providing them product at a cheaper price, because CFB took a chance with Flesh and Blood and LSS.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, yeah, like you said, we don't know the specifics, but it makes sense that it just makes sense. So, all right, and then so you had a chart you wanted to show. I'll go ahead and bring that up, and can you walk us through this to basically? You know, again, there's a lot of people out there because anger's fun, right? It's fun to be angry. A lot of people out there are questioning why LSS was there to begin with. So why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah, so I'll push back on that. I don't think it's fun to be angry. I think, you know, the community is mostly very passionate about the game. They want to see it do well, and so when they see certain factors represented within the sort of the market within the community, I think, yeah, some of them rightly so do get a little bit pissed off about it. And you know, like as I was saying with the Monarch, like I got really pissed off with the Monarch box pricing to the point of sort of removing, you know, CFB, you know, affiliate links and stuff from FabDB. You know, it was just something I just didn't appreciate and didn't like, especially when, you know, love him or hate him, Rudy seems to do the right thing mostly for the community, sort of box pricing around the right price. We can wax lyrical about the Rudy promo cards and all that sort of stuff and sort of what he was doing there, but you know, I think that's sort of an aside and debate that. But so this graph is directly from FabDB. I think this is from March onwards, and there's a couple of really interesting points on this graph. So there's been a question in the community in regards to how useful CFB has actually been for the game and the community. And, you know, present day, maybe they're doing more harm than good. It's really hard to say. But there's a couple of really interesting points on this graph which I really wanted to point to. So the first sort of spike towards the start of that graph, which is in March, April, is actually the first proper discussions we got from Rudy in regards to sort of Flesh and Blood and sort of what's going on there. So those first 2 points there are actually videos that Rudy released regarding Flesh and Blood, and it was starting to garner some interest. So before, it doesn't look like much because the stats towards the end of the chart are much higher than the start. But at the start, those 2 points actually resulted in a 2 to 3 fold traffic increase generally. So you can see it kind of 2 spikes there and then a bit of a dip, and then kind of it just starts to maintain a sort of a level there. That was like, I think 2 or 3 or even 4 times more traffic on FabDB from that point onwards as a result of discussions from Rudy. And then throughout the year, there's a lot of different spikes and things. And a lot of those spikes are either sort of product announcements, spoilers, which we also had. You know, I had a couple of spoilers that come out on FabDB, which we don't do anymore. And then so towards the end of the year, there's another big spike there, which was a result of another Rudy video. And then that massive spike there, and then just a huge increase in traffic point onwards, was actually Channel Fireball. That's Channel Fireball mentioning that they've got a partnership with LSS and there's things coming down the pipeline. And from that point onwards, it was just, you know, the game was go effectively. So The claim that CFB has had little impact or just a purely negative impact on the game is categorically false. If it wasn't for CFB, I still have quite a bit of confidence that the game would have continued growing, but it was a remarkable increase in traffic because of the impact. So, I thought Rudy's sort of impact at the time were big and, worth the time and that sort of stuff. But it just proves just how much bigger CFB's reach is in regards to the market. So, and I suspect, and I don't know this for sure, but I suspect a lot of that traffic is actually from MTG players who kind of got interested in what Blood meant, because one of CFB's key games there, I think it was like Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, and Pokemon, and Flesh and Blood became their fourth sort of major supported product, which for a company that only supports 3 products, that's huge. It's taking effectively sort of focus and business development and direction, planning, all that stuff for a new product. So, CFB definitely took on, I would say a fair amount of risk there to kind of get the game going. But and I'm happy for them. It sort of paid off really well for them. But the impact on the game and sort of the number of players is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, FabDB represents approximately about 10% of the actual player base. So FabDB at the moment has, I think, about 26,000 players on the database. And James White said before that the estimated player base worldwide is about 250,000. So they sort of they base that on sort of the amount of product that's being sold worldwide, and they sort of extrapolate using some models, sort of try and have a good educated guess regards to how many players there, because all the players on the gem system aren't actually all the players playing the game, and most players are actually casual. Most players don't actually play competitively, and so most of the player base actually on FabDB are those who are interested in playing competitively. Sort of representing that fact. So it's interesting to see, the sort of increase in traffic, but also the increase in player base at this time from CFB. So yeah, I brought this graph along just to kind of push back on that claim that CFB has only purely had a negative experience or a negative impact on the game. It's just not true.
Sure. And then let me ask you, because I don't remember my timelines, that was around the time that they announced that CFB was going to be helping them run the initial competitive rollouts. Is that correct? Like the stuff in, because wasn't CFB directly involved in the original, or not the original, the reboot, the post-COVID reboot of the rollout of the competitive play, when they announced that big tier system? Because I think those two went hand in hand, didn't they?
Oh, maybe. I thought that was later, but I could be wrong.
I mean, it may have come out later, but I think, yeah, fair enough.
I mean, maybe I should have done a little bit more research just regards to the articles and the content that was available at the time. I mean, that they could have very well been at the same time. I definitely do know that there's a lot of interest surge in the community because of the organized play events, and particularly the calling event that CFB ran, which was 900 something players. It was huge. That's a huge event by any stretch of the imagination for any gaming event. It's obviously not MTG levels, but bloody good for a new game that was only a year old, or a year and a half old, I think, by the time the event. So yeah, and everyone needs to remember that this is all during. They launched November 2019. April was roughly when COVID landed worldwide. Mm-hmm. I think March was when it sort of was leaving China, being exported to the world. And then, so from April onwards, especially in Australia, we had, a couple of months of lockdown. 2021 was considerably worse for us, at least in that perspective. But New Zealand was locked down for I don't know, I think it was 4 or 5 months or even 6 months during this period as they tried to kind of control it. And the game is growing irrespective of that. So, that's testament, I think, to the game's own success and longevity, just due to how cool the game is and how much fun you play.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from sort of any growth metrics we might be able to garner from the partnerships that they have with other business.
Yeah. And then so this is March 1 through December 30th, 2020. So I wonder if you were to do your full thing, how bad that, or not how bad, but how big the y-axis would be blown off on. So, but this is interesting data.
2021 was a huge year for FabDB and for Flesh and Blood more generally. But it has definitely slowed this year. And I'm not entirely sure what that is. I have a sneaking suspicion that Flesh and Blood has entered sort of a soft ceiling in regards to its player base, just for the time being, because I'm definitely starting to see more of an impact on the set cycles rather than the growth of the game. So although the game is still growing, the traffic seems to be very much dependent now on the set releases. So every three, like, for February when we had Everfest, like the traffic absolutely roof. I thought, holy moly, here we go again. And then it's fallen considerably since then. So I suspect the same thing will happen with Uprising as well. So
Sure.
it's definitely interesting to see how that's grown. But yeah, 2021 was massive. It was just a huge year for.
All right, so I want to make sure we hit all of our points here. So I think we hit the early issues sold out versus high price. I think we kind of already talked about the box prices stuff. So I'm actually just going to go off script, right? Because I'm curious on your take on this, right? My perspective on this is on much of this that's related to this is that the Monarch First Edition basically kind of became the battleground for this issue, right? The catalyst for this whole issue, right? And Monarch was basically negative for, now we know that Monarch was basically negative for everybody in its own way, right? In that when First Edition was released, people were not able to get it to play with it the first weekend, or not everyone was able to get it to play with it the first weekend. And then the people who were sitting on that eventually found out that there was way more product out there than they thought there were. So the players lost out, the investors lost out, and I think that's my take on it, is that because there's all those negative feelings from the investor side in terms of their sealed boxes and all that, that's why they're now coming back and saying, why did I buy a case for $1,600 when CFB's hawking it for $200 or whatever it may be today, right?
Yeah, it's I think there's a few other issues associated with that time frame as well, and that is, if I remember correctly, they definitely had some distribution issues going on, and in fact, I think Monarch was when they were just starting to kind of get on top of distribution problems because of the impact from COVID. Because Arcane Rising, actually, I think it was from like Crucible of War to Monarch, that there was just so much trouble trying to get stock availability to those that needed it. And I have a sneaking suspicion that, there were certainly some people that bought up a few cases, myself included. I think I bought 4 cases of Monarch all up. Wanting to play the game, but also wanting to have some stuff put aside. But I also remember there being an issue in regards to just getting the right allocations through at the time. So I think there was a lot of first edition printed, which we now know is considerable. But at the time, I don't think they were able to get it to everybody. So they sort of got some. I remember them even posting an article regarding shipping, how there was an issue with shipping, and so they paid out of pocket to get it couriered by air, which that stuff is not light. It's very heavy when you're talking about cases and cases. So doing it via air, we're talking astronomical pricing versus using shipping, actual boats to kind of get things across the seas and that sort of stuff. So I think they had distribution problems in regards to just getting product to distributors, and so the stuff that did get there was fairly sort of small pickings, meaning that for draft events and that sort of stuff, they certainly had some issues. But there are also some LGSs that did the right thing. There's a RC Crew Games, which is just sort of my local. There's a store run by a guy called Mac Dimakai. I don't know if that's his actual name. That's his name on Facebook. I think he's pretty well known sort of among collector circles. He runs a store, and that store kept first product, so that people can buy out all of it for their draft events. So they had product available. So this isn't all on LSS. This isn't all on CFB. The stores are also partly responsible for being able to support their player base. Now, obviously, stores that can't get enough, if they just, they're only getting a case or something, which is the case in some cases. Case.
Yep, you nailed it.
So that's obviously going to be a problem. There's nothing they can do about that. But those stores that were able to get a fair amount of product that only sold it to the players or to the investors, they probably could have been a little bit smarter about what they were doing there and sort of held draft events to build their community, because without a community, you don't have a game, and without a game, you don't have collectors.
Yeah, no, very, very fair points. I just thought that, I don't know how you handle that, but I think it was the real issue, or a big issue of a lot of that was, Unlimited and First Edition coming out at different times, right? That put a lot of pressure on people who didn't want to spend X for a box, who felt they had to, and then stuff being opened. And then we all know in retrospect that there was a lot of invisible product, right, that was involved, which is a different thing on the back end, right? But
Yeah, and then you had like, was it Monarch where they had the unlimited edition packed in first edition boxes? So there was that issue as well. So there's like, there was just some weirdness around Monarch. You know,
Right.
there was a lot of challenges and problems with the release. Um, Overprinted, people hoarding it, CFB selling it. You know, saying it's sold out, and it's not really. LGS is not getting enough stock. It's just a bit of a cluster, really.
Yep. But I mean, even today, right? We have reports of some LGSs are actually buying from CFB instead of distributors because the prices are so low, right? So that is, I mean, and that is a real concern because how are LGSs who are, I mean, and again, I don't know how they do all their metrics tracking. I'm not going to pretend to know, but you are rewarded for buying product, right? As an LGS, it goes into your armories and all that stuff, right? So or I should say the events that you're given and all that stuff. So, you know, how do stores that are playing on the up and up compete with that? And I do think that's where the community cry for, you know, LSS get involved. I do think that's the motivation behind that. But, you know, what do they do, right? What do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is, the really interesting thing is, I think LSS and Flesh and Blood are now at a stage whereby if they wanted to, they could sell direct to stores. You know, stores are hearing about it, even if they don't stock it yet. And so there's a future potential there for them to be able to sell direct to stores that don't have specific agreements with distributors, you know, for buying extra product, you know, discounts and that sort of thing. But LSS is now locked into contractual agreements with distributors, but to ensure that they buy a certain amount of product and sort of getting that out to them so that, you know, the game can survive. So the main tool or the main sort of lever I think that they could pull to be able to support LGSs better is not really at their disposal anymore until these sort of contracts run their course. So, you know, potentially the future is a little bit brighter for direct store purchases from LSS, which I think would be the ideal sort of situation. But whether that can eventuate in any real short-term possibility is I'm skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, fair enough. I think we blew through all of our hits. Is there anything I'm missing?
No, but I think there's a sort of an interesting question mark sort of around the European market. The European market for Flesh and Blood is still sort of coming online. You know, the United States definitely came on board in 2020. I definitely would say towards around sort of between August and November was when things really started to take over. I remember sort of posting stats on the Flesh and Blood fan page regarding how big the US market was, and rightly so, right? Like they were 10 times bigger than sort of Australia and New Zealand combined, and so it's going to have that sort of impact. But Europe is still, although Europe definitely has come a long way, I think Europe's still got a while to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the issues, you know, but the EU has certainly had issues with getting a hold of stock because they've sort of started a bit later, and the reason for that is because LSS only has so much man or woman power to kind of get things moving across all these different countries. And so EU has unfortunately lagged a little bit behind because that's sort of been the last market that they've targeted. Or actually, I guess sort of the Asian markets is probably going to be the last targeted, but the EU is still developing in a long way. So I don't know what their agreements are there. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I definitely know of some stores that have bought direct from LSS over there. So, you know, that may be an option to them. I don't know. In reality, I would say to the stores is implore you to reach out to LSS. You know, if it's a really big problem for you and you want to sort of buy direct, at least if they can't do it, make your voice heard, make your voice known, so that if that becomes a possibility for them in the future, one, they get your details. Two, they kind of get some stats available to know sort of how many stores are looking to do that sort of thing, so that when their contracts sort of run their time, that might be a possibility.
Yeah. No, that's good feedback. I think that's really good feedback. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's it. I mean, we could talk for hours about the whole Monarch thing and product and all that, but no, I think we described the problem statement, which is why people are, you know, upset or concerns, probably the better word, right? People are concerned. People have concerns, and many of them are justified.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the concerns themselves are absolutely justified and worth, you know, for the community and for LSS to pay a lot of attention to. Unfortunately, I just think the claims and the people that they're pointing fingers at, they're doing so without sort of taking into account all of the factors that sort of represent the current problems. But that doesn't make the concerns themselves any less important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, yeah, because they're the points are completely fair. If I can sum up what you're saying, the points are fair. Who the point is being pointed at is maybe not fair, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, I agree overall, right? I don't, again, without knowing contracts and stuff, I always assumed they were using pre-orders as a float to get started, and you have to have handshakes to make that happen, right? So however long that lasts for, or whatever it may be, it's a good thing. Otherwise, I don't think they would have made it through the pandemic, right? So I mean, in the same form that they are, would they still be a company? Probably. Would we all be here in the same scope that we are now? I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things whereby games never actually die. Even the really good games, and the reason for that is because you have a community and a player base that have product, and they sort of have the game and they don't really want to let go, and so they play with their friends, and that's actually most gaming. You're playing things like that. So even if LSS didn't have the impact it has now, you would still have these small pockets of players that are playing the game regardless. Potentially using, if they were not releasing any more sets, using all of the cards they've already got and kind of doing interesting things with that, developing new formats and all sorts of things. So, but we don't want to get there. We never want to get there, and we're a long way from that being an actual problem.
Oh yeah.
But this is definitely I think one of those growing pains LSS that they need to address. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but again, I'm skeptical in regards to the timeline and the time frame and what they're actually able to do as a result. So I want to make one additional point. I want to come back to sort of their original business model, which is to sell direct to LGSs. To give you a really good idea in regards to sort of the Australian market, what happened there, most stores, if not all of them, that actually supported the product early on were all buying direct from LSS. And effectively what happened was, in order to kind of get the big gaming chains on board, so Good Games, they had to sell to the distributor. Good Games wasn't going to just buy the product. They had a head office. That office direct dealt with the distributor. And this is actually, I think, a fairly common pattern when it comes to LGSs. So unfortunately, what happened was the LGSs that were buying direct from LSS had to now, because of the contractual agreement LSS had with the distributor, had to now buy from the distributor. And then we're now paying another 15-20% more on top of the box prices. And that had an impact on the community as well. So the community started to pay, I think the early boxes were like $90 to $100 Australian, which I think equates to about $70 US. Mm-hmm. Then had to sort of went up to like 120, 130 as a result of that. So it gives you an idea in regards to the impact the middleman has on the box pricing. And if LSS is able to remove that at some point, it means that their profits don't really change, but everybody gets the product cheaper. And that sort of, I think, circumvents some of these issues. So fingers crossed that they can do that at some point, and the LGSs are willing to hop on board. But yeah, I'm doubtful that could be anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. So when Gongai is my LGS, when they first started supporting, they were ordering direct. I mean, that was way back in the first release. They were ordering direct, and eventually they had to switch over to ordering from the distributors. But I mean, in the U.S. I don't think you were going to break into the U.S. market without the distributors, right? At least at first. So
they tried. I think their take-up stat was something like 1.6% of stores that they actually reached out to. So out of every 100 stores, there's between 1 and 2 stores that actually picked up the product. And again, those stores actually picked up the product, did really well. Like your LGS would have done really well at Flesh and Blood from the early days. But yeah, it's a bit more of a challenge now, I think, in growing. Like I said, I have a sneaking feeling that sort of Flesh and Blood has hit like a soft ceiling until some sort of breakthrough moment. And that breakthrough moment could be a new set. It could be a change in business model. It could be something happening in the community. It could be the Pro Tour. Don't know.
Yeah, Uprising is going to be an important set. In fact, let's flip over the background. There we go. So there's our Uprising. It's going to be an important one. So. All right, well, awesome, man. Thank you so much for those of you who don't know, well, obviously he said he was from Australia. I'm in the U.S., so it's been challenging to hook up, but we finally made it happen, and now this has been great. So anything else you want to add or plugs you want to make before we get out of here?
Yeah, just one thing, really. Is firstly, just thank you for having me on. I've been wanting to talk to you for ages. Maybe we can have another video discussion, something that's a bit more peachy, just talking about the game in general. But otherwise, it's really good to be on the show. I'm a huge fan of Dice Commando and sort of what you're doing and what you're doing with Flesh and Blood. Been a big supporter since the start. And to everyone, I say, I know I think the great thing about your channel and sort of what you're doing is that you actually are tackling really hard topics and discussions. And I've seen some of the things you tackle, and people don't just, I think, understand what you're doing and can sometimes be a bit negative. But I think you're actually a really invaluable asset to the community, and it's really good that we have you.
Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. It does. Awesome. Well, with all that said, I just want to thank everybody for, we want to hear your feedback. Let us know in the comments. Let's get the discussion going, right? Discussion is always good as long as it's in a positive direction, no matter which direction that goes, right? So, thank everyone. Thank you, Kai, for stopping by. And if nothing else, you got to say it with me, man. Go Commando.
Go Commando. Thanks, mate.